Welcome to This Week on the 167. We're talking about dinosaurs and the age of the earth, and we're continuing to answer all the questions that Gardner asked as best we can. Welcome to the 167.
1, 2, 3, let's go!
Hey, good morning, if it is morning when you are watching this. Welcome back to the 167. I'm Carissa. I am here with Pastor Lucas and Megan May. If you haven't met Megan, she's our connections director. So super pumped to have you here with us this morning. If you haven't met Pastor Lucas, I don't know what you've been doing with yourself because he's always on the podcast. So,
But are you super pumped to have me here today?
I am also always super pumped to have you here.
And we are super pumped that Carissa Motley is hosting today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I get to host when Lucas preaches, which is a fun thing. So that's how you can know who spoke on Sunday, Pastor Lucas. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. But we are in our Tough Questions Gardner Asked series. So we've been doing some of those kind of hot topics that people in the community are wondering about. And this week we got to talk about Lucas's crazy conspiracy brain. So just so you all know, that's what I live with all the time.
It's like we should have filmed it at home on our couch.
Oh my gosh. It's
that's-
like, you are that guy in that
Pepe
meme.
Sylvia meme.
You are that guy all the time. So that's fun. Before we get started, you have a shout out.
Yeah, shout out to a new listener, Drew Fruget. Thanks for listening and catching up. I understand that he started listening and then he went back and listened to this whole year's worth of podcasts. So, Drew, welcome to the podcast. Yeah.
Also, we've been podcasting. We had our 200th episode not too long ago. So there's lots of content you can go back through should you.
It gets progressively better. If you go back to the
Decide to do
original,
that.
it's a little touch and go.
It's a little touch. You'll notice a progression in like our camera work has gotten better and the editing has gotten better. And anyway, some of that's thanks to Megan. Thank you, Megan, for helping us
And
with
Brent.
that. And Brent Richardson. Shout out to Brent Richardson. Okay.
We're going to have to start doing credits at the end where it's like edited by Brent Richardson.
Let's do it.
Intro by
I
Megan
love it.
May.
If you want to shout out on the podcast, on the 167, tell us something cool that you learned from the podcast and we'll shout you out next time. Yeah.
Give us a like and follow.
Also, I just want to shout out like all the middle school boys right now because I know that a lot of them were super pumped about the sermon this Sunday.
Dinosaurs.
Because we talked about dinosaurs and dragons and the age of the earth and the creation of the earth. Like, there was a lot. You covered a lot this past Sunday. So we were joking about like, how do you take 45 minutes and then like give an overview or a summary? Even your 45 minutes was an overview, as you said, of like 20 years worth of research.
Oh, yeah. It's just like there's so much out there.
Yeah, there's so much out there. We were, one of the group meets we're in our young adult chat, one of the girls was like, oh my gosh, this kid I babysit for just asked me about dinosaurs today. And I was like, hold on, buddy. She's like, how do I do that? How do I tell him that?
Come, children, let's sit in the living room and watch this on YouTube.
So, story time with Uncle Lucas. If you want to talk about dinosaurs and dragons, he's your guy. So we're just going to talk for a few minutes about unpacking a little bit of that, but we definitely don't have time to get into the weeds on everything, right? But a couple highlights we want to hit is your very first point that you talked about in the sermon. It was literally the only point in the notes, is that the Bible will never embarrass you. Okay, so tell me about that. Why did you feel like that was important to point that out to people?
Well, because that's kind of I didn't have time to convince everybody of everything of like, okay, we're going to talk about layers in the earth and volcanic, eruptions and timelines and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just like, I want people to have just the vaguest notion of like, you don't have to be embarrassed to believe this.
Okay.
Because that's usually the thing is that people, they're like, oh, you believe in the Bible, you don't believe in science. And it's like, no. You can believe in both. You absolutely can. And just because you believe in the Bible, you don't have to be embarrassed about that because it actually is more accurate than most histories and sciences.
Okay, and your thing that you hammered on there, which I think is really important, just foundationally, starting with, you said, it's not that the Bible contradicts science or history, but you said the Bible is science. It is history.
Yeah.
Right? So where do we see some examples of that?
Well, even but definitionally, like I said, science is information. And so the Bible contains a lot of information. And then even in history, I don't think there's been one time where the Bible has said something is there and then they've gone to dig it up and they haven't found it.
Okay.
So, by all, metrics, like we've talked about some ancient manuscripts, some tablets that have been found, things like that. And it's like, by any metric, if it wasn't about religion, like if God wasn't in the Bible, if it was just a history of the Hebrew people, it would be considered the standard for history. But because it contains God, it's classified as mythology for most historians.
Sure.
And then the science part, like, you had me look up some of these. So I said it wrong I think this is the whole reason why you've asked me this question, so I can come on the podcast and say that I was wrong on Sunday. I said that the water cycle is featured in the Bible, and I said I think it's in Proverbs, but it's not. It's in every other book except Proverbs. Ecclesiastes 1:7 says, all the rivers flow into the sea, and yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, then they flow again. So it's basically talking about that it flows into the sea and it's cycled out. Psalm 135:7, it says, he causes the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth, and he makes lightning for the rain, and he brings the wind out of his treasures. So in the Bible, you have the rivers flowing into the ocean, the vapor rising from the ocean, and then the rain falling again. Job 26:8, he wraps up the waters in the clouds, and the clouds do not burst under them. And so Isaiah 55:10, for as the rain comes down and the snow from heaven, and they do not return, but the water to the earth, and it makes it bud and bring forth. So it's talking about how it rains and the soil soaks it up. So all the things that we later on discover in the 12th and 13th century were like, did you know that the soil like soaks up the water and then the plants use it? And like everybody already knew that for generations and generations. So it talks about dew point in Job 36. Like there's all kinds of stuff. Job 38, there's this really cool passage that you're sick of hearing me talk about, but it says this: God is giving a monologue to Job. And so in this monologue, God is saying a bunch of things that like nobody could know. And Job's writing them down, and it didn't become like widely known in the ancient world. It's just some monologue that some guy thought that God was telling him. And then later on, when you examine it, it contains all these things that later on we find through telescopes and science. So it says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or can you loosen Orion's belt? And so the Pleiades are a constellation in the night sky. It was, and you asked me kind of, how do they know what the Pleiades is? And it's not actually the Pleiades, it's the Kaima, and then Orion is the Kisil, which is, the Hebrews had their own kind of zodiac. It's called the Mazzaroth. And so that's just how it translates into Greek. And so the Pleiades is a constellation in the night sky, but most constellations are billions of light years away from each other, that you just kind of see them from your perspective as joined. But the Pleiades is the only one in the night sky that is gravitationally linked. And so God's saying, hey, did you bind the Pleiades together through gravitational pull? And it's like, nobody could possibly know that.
Right.
And then he says, have you loosened the belt of Orion? And what's happening right now is because galaxies are moving further away and space is expanding, the three stars that are Orion's belt are actually coming apart. It's
Oh
like,
my gosh.
for us to observe it, it's a minuscule rate.
Right.
But for, what's happening is that they're, moving light years apart. And so there's no way that anybody could know that until we had high-powered microscopes and we started to track the stars for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so...
And telescopes.
Yeah.
Not
Oh, I'm
just
sorry. I'm saying microscopes. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff in the Bible. There's blood clotting. The fact that the Hebrews, they started circumcising their kids, that God ordains it on the 8th day. And on the 7th day that you are born, that's when your vitamin K kicks in to its top rate, which is a blood clotting agent. And then there's, what is it? It's called, I don't know. There's a blood clotting agent that it functions at 110% on the 8th day that you're born.
Which is why it would make...
Prothrombin. Thrombin.
Okay, medical people don't
fridge right now.
That's right.
Prothrombin
Yeah.
is at the highest it is. It reaches 110% of its normal level on the 8th day that you're born.
Wow, what a coincidence that God told them to do that procedure on that specific day when their bodies were going to be able to handle something so, right? Like intense. So weird, right? That God did that. That is crazy.
So I did that really fast, but there's like 50 to 100 of those.
So it's not crazy to believe that the Bible is science. It's not crazy to believe that the Bible is history. So I'm going to toss this one to Megan. So why do you think, like, why are people, and I think Christians also, we are in this, like, why are we more likely to trust modern news or science articles than the Bible? Like, what makes it so hard to just go, nope, the Bible says it? We're more like, well, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association. We're like, why does that sound better than the Bible says?
Yeah. Well, in only my 23 years here, I can at least tell you, like, I've grown up, as probably you guys did too, that we didn't get taught creation in school.
Right.
And for some reason, like, school was more important. Like, I didn't get taught the Bible in school. So school is different than my relationship with God, than my spiritual life. That's always been a separation of church and state, quite literally, or church and school, whatever you want to call it. And so for me, especially growing up, like, science was different than God. And then when I was a teenager and we start having these questions of, like, I remember asking my dad, like, is it really like millions of years, having this question? He was like, no. And I was like, what? Like, it's just a whole kind of a brain explosion there. And so I think because we're taught at such a young age, like what Lucas said, these trials that actually are debunked, that aren't true. And it's crazy when I found that out. I think I was like 20 something when I found that out too. I was like, why isn't there a lawyer like going back to like remove this from our schools? Like they're like, it's just crazy to me.
Yeah.
That's still the case. But because we are kind of trained in that sort of a way, it's kind of just our natural default to kind of not have God in there. And then also just like spiritually, like for me too, and I think for a lot of people, we naturally depend on our own understanding and flesh. So if we're already having that with us, and then on top of that, school and, you know, the government is kind of shoving this in our face as well, why would we trust the Bible more, you know?
I'm even curious, in your Bible college experience, how did they explain Genesis to you? Did they explain it like, oh, it's a poem and it's, you know, it's like symbolic, or were they like, no, it is
history?
That's still, depending on what professor you have, is still kind of a difference.
Interesting.
So some of our, there's some like poetic literature and different genres like that. And then others, some believe it's 5,000 or 50,000 or 2. Like, so it's, and all of us Bible college students would like, you know, have arguments with each other, what we believed was right. And so even there, like in Bible scholars and in the college that I went to, people were still at odds with each other. And so I think it's really difficult to even trust like myself and who I want to go to, and, you know, what outlet, especially, I mean, the media too is a whole other thing. And I think too, like, people don't want to trust God is real, because then they're going to have to follow him and accept his morals and beliefs, which is funny because all of those are there to have you have the best life on earth.
Right.
But we just want to be selfish, and it ends up even worse for us. But
No, that's really good. I think what you said there about the fact that because of legal things and culture, like because education and religion are so separate in this country, I think that was a really good point you made about, so then we kind of just grow up with them separate in our lives. This is what I learned in school, and this is what I learned at church, and like they're separate things, right? And I also think too, so like we grew up in, like you said, the Scopes trials, right? Is that what that was? We're in it was in 1987.
Scopes trials were in
That was
1920s.
the 30s, yeah. But then you talked about the case in 1987 where creation could not,
Aguilera versus
like, whatever.
something.
yeah, they banned it.
When you couldn't teach things in schools. And so that's like literally in our lifetimes, right? Like that's when we were starting school, is the late 80s. And so that has been like our whole educational experience. And you just think about the way that has shaped everyone from like in their 40s down, right? Like there's this huge separation that I don't know that we ever kind of brought back, right? Like started connecting those things together. And then also because we grew up in the late 80s and early 90s, like we grew up in Sunday school. But there's also been, I feel like recently, a movement away from Sunday school, away from like teaching kids, here's what's in the Bible. Here's the creation story. Here's this, and this is true, and this is trustworthy, and this, right? Like, here's the foundations of this. Like, there's been in a lot of churches of movement just towards more entertainment of kids rather than teaching them scriptures and truth.
Socio-emotional learning.
Yeah, I mean, and again, because that's reflected in schools, right? Like we're translating a lot of that into churches, and I'm not obviously saying that about all churches or necessarily here, but like I do
culture
think
seeps in.
Culture has started to be like, well, this is like they need to learn this. This is what they have to be taught, and this is what they have to learn, and that separation is, I think, hard for us to overcome then and bring that back to like, no, God's in everything, right? Like when you said we trust in our own understanding, like Proverbs 3:5 says specifically, don't trust in your own understanding. Lean not on your own understanding.
And, I'm pretty dogmatic when it comes to some of this stuff. But
No.
I know. But you can even see, like, when you're describing that, it's like, yeah, we're kind of taught, like, yeah, the Bible is mostly true.
Right.
But really, it's kind of mythology because, like, science tells us that this is what happens is the Big Bang in millions and millions and millions and millions of years. And then God kind of comes on the scene and it's okay. Like
Yeah.
we can believe in Jesus Christ and it's like, yeah, but God says that I created the earth in 6 days. And you're like, well, God's mistaken. I mean, like, that's really
Sure.
when you start to get into that of like Genesis isn't actually history and, like Exodus is wrong. And like, it's like you're starting to take parts of the Bible and be like, well, this, we're kind of ashamed of this and we'd
Yeah.
rather hide this away.
Yeah. No, that's true. So with the with all of that in mind, sorry, I have a lot of just kind of things I'm looking at in my notes here, trying to decide where we want to go with all of this, because there is a lot. I would just say to like, okay, let's go to your thing about the creation story, right? So you said you're not going to go to Genesis.
Yeah, because it is true that Genesis 1 is written as a Hebrew poem. It's written with inclusios in it. Day 1 is light and dark. Day 3 is sun and moon stars.
Yes, yeah.
It's
Right.
written in a poetic way. But then that's why like Genesis 2 then kind of reiterates
Yeah.
what's happened in a more factual way.
Okay. So we look at, in order to know, and again, this is varied opinions on this, right? Which I'm sure you probably heard in Bible college too. Like, how long did creation take? Is it 6 literal days? Is it, like you said, some people believe day means age or a period of time, or it's 1,000 years, or it's whatever. So you're going to go on record. You already did. You believe it's a literal day. It's an actual day.
Yeah, the reason that they make that argument is because the Bible will use a phrase like in the days of Elijah.
Right.
And so people are like, well, that means an indeterminate period. I'm going, yes, but I just said that word in the days of Elijah, and
Yeah.
you know exactly what it means.
During his lifetime.
But then if they say, well, Lucas, how long did it take you to drive here? And I say 2 days. They don't go, was it like metaphorical? Like if I say like,
Two actual days.
yeah, if I say back in the day, you know what I mean. And then when I say it took me 3 days to get here, you also know what I mean.
Sure.
And so the people that make that argument are confusing. It's like being myopic and microscopic about the way that you translate the word and then reinserting the word without contextualism.
Okay. So you told us in the sermon that you're going to, a very trustworthy way, though, to interpret days is to go to Exodus when God writes the 10 Commandments. So I love when Megan is like, oh my gosh, this thing in the Bible, this was so cool. So this was a thing for me that I was like, oh yeah, I've read this, but the way you pointed it out was like, oh my gosh, God wrote the 10 Commandments himself. So I love that you were like, it wasn't Moses up there chiseling away, right?
Yeah.
Like, hold up, God, I can't take notes fast enough, right?
God
like,
said billions of years, but I just wrote days.
but I wrote days. It was shorter, right? Like it wasn't. So it was like the actual God wrote the 10 Commandments on the stone tablets. So that's cool.
With his little finger. We're cracking up.
if you
It's so
read
funny.
if you read that story, what it seems like is happening a little bit is, if I had to put it in like sci-fi terms,
Oh,
can
boy.
I just say that? So it seems like what happens is he goes up on the mountain and almost like there's this portal or a rip that into heaven, and then what is probably Christ, because there's all these things about how we can't process the Father and our brains
Right,
would explode.
right.
So like Christ steps out of heaven in his previous form, the form that he appears to Joshua in and all these different things. He appears to Abraham and has dinner with him, steps out of it. And, I don't know if he uses a heavenly pen, or
his
own
actual
chisel,
finger.
or his finger, because like you have, of course, the hand of God that writes on the
Yeah.
wall in Daniel.
Daniel.
And he makes this tablet for Moses, and it says that he cuts 2 tablets and writes on them front and back. And I'm like, if you look at the amount of information, I'm like, he had to have the smallest, like most precise handwriting. And so, but yeah, it's like, well, maybe this does or doesn't mean it. I'm going, man, if God wrote something with his own hand, I'm probably going to err on the side that he understands what he wrote. Because
So
that's,
you're saying your point is he wrote that he made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, which is why he
he
wants us
says-
to honor Sabbath
yeah, therefore in the same way.
in the same way.
And so people are always like, in the same way means metaphorically. I'm like, no, it means in the same way.
No, like actually, he wants you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point of the Sabbath is if I can create the entire existence in 6 days and rest on the seventh, you can do this. Because people are like, no, I'm too busy. And God's like, no.
You don't understand.
Yeah.
I was like, no, like I wrote it right here for you. So that is a great place to go examine for yourself, right? In Exodus 20.
20, and then later on in 32 and 34 is when
Yeah.
it says.
So Exodus 20 is when God first gives Moses the 10 Commandments. Then you talked about how he goes down the mountain and he smashes them because he's mad at the Israelites. I also would have been mad at the Israelites in that moment, and my brother.
I know, it's like he comes down and he's like, well, don't need these.
Well, you guys screwed that up. Anyway, so he goes back and later in Exodus. So again, Luke, as Lucas said, please, cross-reference for yourself. Go to the
Go look it
Bible.
up.
Don't just, and that's why I wanted you to bring all those scriptures about
Well, that's why,
science. Where does it mention scientific things in the Bible?
and that's why I also started that thing where going, I wasn't there.
Sure.
And nobody else was. And so, like, I'm not telling you that I saw creation happen in 6 literal days. I'm just saying that to the best of my knowledge, it happened because the only eyewitness account is God, and that's what he wrote about it.
So, I mean, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. So some other ways that we kind of like, there is a lot of crazy stuff in the Bible, right? And so you got into dinosaurs. How old do you believe the earth is based on some biblical, references?
That would be an important thing. Somebody asked me about that. I said
let's
about
go.
6,000 to 10,000 years. And that's 10,000 is more like because there's a possibility of the gap theory. But the 6,000 years is because if you trace the genealogies, it's 4,000 years from Adam to Jesus. And now here we are in 2025.
Okay.
So that's where the 6,000 comes from, is that if you trace a genealogy from Adam to, and you can do that because the Bible is so well documented.
So if you have a lot of time on your hands and you want to count through the generations from Adam to Jesus.
Oh, you don't have to do that. You can just get on the internet.
You could get on the
internet has done it for you.
Well, how trustworthy the internet is. If you really, really want to be accurate, you do it yourself. It's available to you.
I used to have this giant thing that you could spread out. It was a 26-foot long timeline that you could hang on the wall.
Wow.
And it showed you the overlapping ages of everybody. Like
Yeah.
Adam is alive maybe to the flood. I mean, it's like,
Right, because
it's like,
he's lived so long. People
Yeah.
live so long in the beginning of the world. Okay, so let's get into some of this fun stuff. Megan, you were talking about this. So tell me, I'm going to let you ask this question, right? You were talking about, so Lucas brought up the word dragon and that it's mistranslated. So why don't you talk about kind of what you said you were debriefing about after the sermon?
Yeah. So you talked about how dragon is sometimes translated as jackals, and that owls were translated as ostriches, which is a really interesting and funny almost difference there. And so you talked to that it was translated differently because of not necessarily the Hebrew words, right? Because those are the same. Those mean like dragon or whatever, but different translations like ESV, NLT are different animals, and so that made me question, oh my gosh, what translation's actually fully true, closest to the Hebrew, right? Or even just one that I can actually trust to read. Because if it's different in that area, what other areas are different? And, things like that. So just what's the general best translation besides going to the Greek and Hebrew every time?
So this is a larger question. What one do you like to read?
Personally, I read between NLT, CSB, and then the Amplified version. So,
Yeah, Amplified's good. So I read a lot of ESV, and ESV is Amplified is ESV with notes,
Right.
essentially. It's funny because I had to go to. I'm usually not a big KJV fan. We have to shout out to the KJV bros, KJV only bros. But it's the one that translates it dragon most often because it's the oldest translation. And so what happens then is that people start to fall into this science and secular humanism thing. They're like, well, we can't write dragons because that sounds crazy. And so they start to change it, and all the modern translation changes it to jackals and ostriches, which, like I said, and the reason I pointed that out, it doesn't make sense because in the beginning when it's talking about, oh, God made the sea, and all the great, most of those same translations will translate that as whales or sea creatures, and then later on translated as jackals. And like I said, it most often is is translated in other Hebrew texts and stuff like that as sea serpents, but it means monsters. And so I guess you could say they're desert monsters or whatever, but it's very serpent-like and everything else. But so as far as Bible translations, I read a bunch of them. So that's what I always recommend is that you can actually buy this thing that it's a Bible, and you can get them in different versions, but every page is 4 different translations of the Bible. And so you'll have the ESV next to the NASB, next to the NLT, next to the NIV. And so if you read, so you're reading like a chunk of like a paragraph of verses, and you're reading them side by side. And then what you can actually do with a highlighter or a pen is go through and mark the things that are different, and then just research those things. Like you can go to the internet, and the internet is so great now because you don't have to have a Greek degree and a Hebrew degree to actually see the Hebrew and the Greek in the very most general sense. Of course, the more you study, you'll understand better. But that was what I'd recommend, is not necessarily reading one particular translation. I read the ESV. I like the ESV. Before that, I read the NLT. But I find that the ESV is it scratches the itch of the KJV bros. The KJV bros are like, it's a word for word translation, and I'm like, yes, but it's not fantastic as much as everything else is. But the ESV is trying to be a word for word translation, where the NLT will add words or to communicate an idea. So NLT is a lot easier to read, but if you can read them side by side, it's way better, because then you know what's different and you can look that up.
So the Bible app also allows you to switch between translations, which is super handy. I do that a lot. I'll read a passage in one version. I also prefer NLT just for accessibility of language. I like Amplified as well. So it's like, I do this thing sometimes because I try to read through the Bible every year. I do a plan, but I will usually change translations every year, and just to see, what I glean differently. Because it's like at a certain point, when you've read the Bible enough times, you're like, oh, this is familiar, this is familiar. So that's just my own personal study thing, where I'm like, okay, so this year I'm reading NLT. Next year I'll probably read ESV. I did it one year in the Amplified. As a literary person, I have an English degree. I do enjoy sometimes just reading a passage in the Message translation, which is not translation. It's a paraphrase. But I enjoy reading the Message sometimes because it's it's a perspective, right? Yep. It's not a translation, but it can give you a different way to think about something. Yeah. And then Lucas has got me hooked on Bible Hub, so I will go that's what gives you the Greek and the Hebrew. And so, I do think it's a good question, though, to say, well, if this thing has so many different, versions, so many different translations, how then do I trust, if people are the ones translating, how do I trust the text? And your answer, I know, is, eventually you have to go back to the original language if you really, really
if you're
want,
really serious about it.
Yeah, if you want to get to the root of a thing, going to the Hebrew and the Greek is going to be your best bet, which Bible Hub is a great resource for that. I also don't read Greek or Hebrew, but I'm doing a Revelation study right now, so it's like, oh yeah, every time it says dragon in Revelation, it's drakon, which is the word, it's the Greek word for it. There's only one. That's it.
Well, and like I said, and that's the thing, and it is my conspiracy theory brain, but literally, that's some of the things that I look at, I'm going, is it just simpler than we think it is? Where it's like in Revelation, they're like, yeah, Satan's a dragon. He's a dragon, he's a dragon, he's a dragon, the great dragon of old, the great serpent of old. And then you go back to the Garden of Eden, and they're like, he's probably a
snake.
Probably a little tiny snake.
Snake. He's a snake.
Yeah, and I'm like going, my whole life I have sat there and went, oh yeah, Eve talked to a snake. That is totally normal. And then the retort to that is like, well, I bet all the animals talked. And I'm like, but I'm crazy if I think that Satan is a dragon.
Like an actual dragon.
Yeah, and he shows up as an angelic dragon, and she's like, a magical dragon told me to eat this fruit.
Puff the magic dragon.
Yeah. If a magical dragon showed up and was like, maybe you should have that burger, I'd be like, maybe I should. Maybe I should do something I didn't think I was supposed to do because, and I'm going, and people are like, you think that Satan's a dragon? I'm like, it says it 13 times in the New Testament. A lot of times, yeah. So I'm just like, maybe it's simpler than we think it is, but...
Yeah. But I do think that that's fascinating. Again, I looked up Draken, and it only appears in Revelation. That's the only place where that word appears.
About Satan.
And it is about Satan every time. And so I think that that's really interesting, though, that okay, so John's writing his revelation in Greek, and that's the word he uses. But that, to me, presupposes that people know what a dragon is, right?
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't use the word dragon unless people knew what a dragon was, right? Like, that seems very specific. And so, again, this is just this, it's so weird, right? Such a coincidence that, as you were pointing out, most cultures have dragon myths. They have stories about dragons, and they were these large creatures that people tried to defeat as acts of heroism and acts of strength. And you see, again, most cultures have a flood story, a great flood story. I was saying before we started that I've taught a world literature class before, and it was like, you have to go back to the beginning of literature, right? And so, like, the earliest piece of literature, right, like script that people consider literature, aside from the Bible, because the Bible is considered literature in most literary circles, but like this ancient text is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was found in Mesopotamia, like very early. It had, let me finish
Sorry,
my
go ahead.
thought. It has a flood story in it, right? Like, so the hero finds this person who survived a worldwide flood. So I'm going like, it's pervasive in almost all cultures, right? It's not just the Bible that has this flood myth, right? So it begs the question, like, why does everyone have these stories if they're just legends and myths, right?
Well, it's funny because the Epic of Gilgamesh is dated to about 2000 BC, and it will literally tell you that it is during the era of Ur.
Yes, right.
Which I'm
That's where
like-
he lives.
Yeah, and I'm going, the only way that you would know that is by comparing it
To the Old
Bible.
Testament, right?
That's
This
it.
is where Abraham
Yeah.
ends
So,
up living.
but yeah, I think that those are called charter myths. And so and I had a cultural anthropology teacher that turned out to be a universalist, which was
Ooh, at
which was-
Bible college?
Yeah, he got fired.
Woo!
But it was crazy because he taught our cultural classes, and so it was cultural anthropology. So like, what better person to learn from?
Sure.
But he was comparing and showing that, like, in Africa, they have stories that are called charter myths. So it's like the myth of their civilization,
Right.
kind of like Adam and Eve.
The creation stories.
And it is exactly the same. It's there's a man and a woman in a garden, and a trickster comes to,
Right.
whatever,
Yep.
like a Loki
Yep.
character. And I'm just sitting there. He's like, see, like, and his point is like, maybe the Bible isn't true. And I'm like, you just said that all people groups across the earth have the same charter myth, and
They
you
do.
think that means that the Bible is not true?
Right, right.
And he's saying, no, it's just like everybody else. I'm like, or everyone else also was told the
Yeah.
story of the Garden of Eden.
Right,
Like,
right. That became foundational and adapted to other cultures.
yeah. And it's like, that's the same thing where like you'll have people all over the world that, they have a flood myth, and it's just like, well, it was a regional flood. They all had a regional flood on the same, like it's ridiculous. But we believe in these things. Like even somebody the other night asked me about Pangea. And I'm like, listen, Pangea only works if the ocean levels are at the same height that they are now. Like, that's not really how that works. Because we go, oh, look, this coast looks like it fits in this coast. I'm like, there are thousands and thousands of miles of seabed
In
between here and
yeah.
that. And so
Yeah.
if you just drain the ocean, it no longer looks like the continents fit together.
Sure.
It's just land.
Right.
And so it's just weird. But
Okay. So, Megan, I'm interested. What did you learn about dinosaurs as a kid? What did you grow up thinking about dinosaurs?
I actually was a kid that was obsessed with dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah?
I thought they were so freaking cool. And there's this thing called the T-Rex Cafe that we loved. It was just like this whole atmosphere. Anyway, so I always loved them, and I was always interested in like the archaeology of that and things like that. But I always knew that, or I was taught growing up that they existed, millions of trillions of years
Right,
ago.
right.
And then there was this big explosion, then they're all gone. And then
Yeah.
I remember being a kid and being like, then why are we here? Like, how did this... That doesn't...
How did it start over?
Right, then there's these little microorganisms that existed, and then now we're humans here. But, I mean,
Yeah,
So that's what
yeah.
I grew up knowing about them. So not just, pretty much like just the basic kind of a thing of dinosaurs. But I always thought it was interesting too about dragons, and so, or like alligators, like the differences and the connections of these two. Are these connected? What's the difference? Did God create dinosaurs? Like, is that real? Is that in the Bible? And then you talked a little about the Leviathan, and there's a lot of different pieces you could go to. But
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like yes, same. Like, it's interesting how they teach you dinosaurs in school. Also, we are from the Land Before Time generation
And the first Jurassic Park.
and the first Jurassic Park. Like, Land Before Time is now. He was like, we should show the girls Land. And I was like, we should not show the girls Land Before Time. It's devastating. Will crush your soul. Like, it's the
It's a
saddest
core
ever.
trauma.
Oh my gosh, millennial trauma all
But I
starts with
did
the Land
have a
Before
Pizza
Time.
Hut little puppet from the Land Before Time.
Sweet. So, like, yes, dinosaurs were, for me as a kid, like, they were this separate thing,
Right.
Like, they, dinosaurs are maybe a thing that really did exist. We have all these skeletons and fossils and, which we have talked with our girls a lot about, like, how once they draw flesh on them, like, so many skeletons could actually look like so many things, right? Like,
Right.
how do you even know what the dinosaurs actually looked like, right? Because of a skeleton. So there's all kinds of weird stuff you can get into with that. But yeah, for me, they were always kind of a separate thing, like, not biblical. So it's very interesting to dig in to the Bible and be like, they're not in conflict with each other, right? Like, the Bible has this as part of what's in there. What you want to say something?
Well, the dirty secret too about dinosaur bones is they will find like 2 or 3 of them and construct an entire skeleton
Yes.
by guessing.
Yes.
Which is what happened at the Scopes trials is they brought in a tooth and they were like, if this tooth was a tooth of a man, this is what the entire man would look like. And they made Neanderthal man or Encino man, one
Sure,
of the two.
yeah.
And it's like, and it turned out it was a
It
pig's
wasn't
tooth.
even a human tooth.
And then it was like this one with arthritis, which is why you see like the Neanderthal
The
man is
hunched
hunched over.
over, yeah.
That's because it was like a woman in Scotland with arthritis. It's like, it's not even close to being the thing. And then the other thing was a jawbone that was taped to some guy's face. But I'm saying, like, that's the thing about dinosaur bones is they will literally find a foot or a leg and go, well, if it has this foot or leg, this is what this thing looks like.
Yeah,
And
it's a
there's
projection.
yeah, very, 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 very few
Complete
skeletons that are found.
Yeah. So I did think it was very interesting, and you referenced some links in the sermon notes. We went to the Creation Museum a few years ago. Visited the Ark in the Creation Museum, and you also referenced, or you linked a thing, I think, to the Museum of the Bible. There's all these places that are actually doing this research to prove, right, like biblically, this is not far-fetched, this is not crazy, this is like the Bible lines up with, different dates, but the Bible lines up with that dinosaurs existed and that they were real and that, he talks about these things. So I just think that's really interesting that, like, if we want to not feel crazy, there is proof, right? There's evidence that will back us up on that.
Well, and it is a, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose the word. It's not a fair supposition to say that people who are religious have a bent, but people who are secular humanists
Who are
do not.
scientists, right?
Yeah.
That scientists don't have their own bias.
They don't have a philosophy, or
Right,
they don't,
right.
because like even Stephen Dawkins, who is like one of the most famous atheists out there, he did an interview where they asked him like, "Hey, the mood is shifting in the scientific community. Most scientists now believe in intelligent design because you have to believe in that to even study things,
Right.
To say that it makes sense." And he was like, "No, absolutely not, absolutely not." And they said. And like they kind of did this thing where it's like, okay, like we may not include this in the interview, but just between us, like if we take God off the table, like an ancient race of aliens came and made our world like aliens or whatever, Prometheus, it's like, and he's like, we're going to take God off the table. And if you say this, no one will believe in God. Do you believe in intelligent design? He goes, oh yeah. And it's like, he's specifically doing it because he does not want people to believe in God.
Yeah.
And so he will ignore good science in order to propagate his philosophy. And so he's like one of the most famous people that's out there. And it's just like everybody has a bent.
Yeah.
And so it's a, I don't know, just a misnomer. That was the word I was looking for. It's a misnomer that that people who are scientists are objective. They're just not.
Oh, that's okay. That was good. Real quick, can you define for everybody, in case they don't know, what is secular humanism? What is that worldview?
Secular humanism is the belief that all that exists is our flesh. So that's why if you're a secular humanist, you don't believe in God. There's no higher power. There's no Allah. There's no Buddha. There's no nothing. It's just matter.
Okay.
And so that's why, the Big Bang Theory is, recently there was a comedian that basically did a stand-up comedy about this where he says in the beginning there was nothing and then the nothing became something and then you return to nothing. And he's like, basically secular humanism is the worship of nothing. Like nothing is your God. It's pretty miraculous that nothing becomes something. And so it's pretty funny. But
I mean, when you say it that way.
Right.
right. And like, that's the whole thing is that, you know, Christians will be criticized by scientists because they call it the God of the gaps. So they say like, well, how could this happen? And we go, because God spoke it into existence. And they're like, well, that's a cop out. And I'm like, but your thing is that all the laws of science that you believe are defied
In order for the universe to come into existence.
Yeah, and mutations and
Right.
evolution
Right.
and all these things. And when you see a miracle that happens in nature or design, and it's like, how do you explain that? Well, millions of years, or if we just roll the dice enough times, or if we, and I'm going, you also believe in miracles, you just don't believe in God. And so they don't have, there's nothing that fills in their gaps. They just have gaps. And it's like, and you can punch holes in evolution and the Big Bang very easily. It's very flimsy. And yet, you know, like when we're like, oh, well, God filled that in. They're like,
No,
well,
that's crazy.
that's crazy.
That's
and I'm
crazy.
like, well, what fills in your gaps? Nothing.
Well, and that was I remember that being a very big topic when we were in school. Just that constantly people were talking about finding the missing link, right? Like to make Darwin's chain of evolution make sense. So we found that we're going to find the missing link, or we found the missing link, or this could be the missing link. Like I remember that being very talked about, very common in language. And it's, I mean, obviously not so much anymore, but do you remember that? Was that,
yeah.
like it was, we were talking about the missing link all the time, which like you're saying, there's an unexplainable gap, right? Like if you're going to say that monkeys became humans, there's something missing in there and we can't find a thing to fill it.
And they're
right?
trying to find one skeleton.
One thing,
And I'm
yes.
going, there would have to be millions.
Right.
There
In
were,
order
like-
for that to make sense.
And not just one evolutionary bump, but several.
Yes, it has to continue.
And so, and that's the thing where, if I could throw back to last week, can I throw back to
Yeah.
last week?
Yeah.
You didn't know that homosexuality and dinosaurs were related. But
Secular humanism.
there was a very big boom in the 90s when
Mm-hmm.
we started studying genetics. And it was like, oh, we're going to prove that homosexuality is
Yeah.
genetic.
We're going to find the gay gene.
The gay gene. It was
Yeah,
like,
the
and that
gay
was how,
gene.
and we're not saying that to be flippant. Like that was what it was called. It was called, we're
Yeah,
going to find the gay
absolutely.
gene.
Yeah.
And they went and they mapped the entire human genome. And then they were like,
Doesn't exist.
it doesn't exist. And so then that was when it was
There's
like,
no
for a little
such
while, it was like, well, this is just our choice. And now we're back to,
I was born this way.
I was born this way, which is the same argument as there's a genetic component to it, but it's just reductive. That it's like, I don't have to explain this with science. I just believe I was born this way.
Right.
Which is a metaphysical argument. It's no longer a science argument.
Yes.
And so that's what I mean. Like every
Yeah.
time people are like, oh no, science is going to prove the Bible wrong. You're going to find like a gene that and I'm like, and it doesn't happen.
It has not yet happened. So fascinating. I also think that goes back to you were talking about language, right? That like we grew up in a postmodern culture, and like we're seeing the ramifications of that now, that people just say this is a true thing, and now you're expected to just accept that that's a true thing.
Which I should probably put the record straight in the fact of, yes, I do have a conspiracy theory that Satan is actually, like, his angelic form is some kind
Serpentine.
of, it's serpentine, it's, you know, dragon-esque. But when, you know, that's what I was trying to explain to people, and like, oh, Lucas believes in magical dragons that roam the earth. I'm like, no, I believe that we used a word dragon to describe giant reptiles, and that was, we lived alongside them for a long time, and then they changed it to dinosaur, and now it's like I said, it just that quick. Mm-hmm. And we've seen it even in modern times where you actually see them changing the dictionary
Right.
to suit a new thing, and then they're like, you know, like we joke
Yes.
about that with our daughter because
Yeah.
she likes unicorns.
Yes.
And it's like you can actually go and find a dictionary in like the 1960s that says unicorn, and it's just a rhinoceros with one horn. It's like there's like monohorns and unihorns, and it's funny.
But that's the thing, like, and you're saying that's the thing about language, like literally every year words are added to the dictionary. So you can go back 10 years ago and there are words that didn't exist last year, like that became culturally popular. People started saying them enough that everybody's like, well, I guess that's a word now. So we're just going to add that to the dictionary.
Yeah.
And then it just changes language and
it's-
meaning.
And it's the same thing that happens to the Bible, is that
Right.
what once was considered history and fact for thousands of years, you change a few things and all of a sudden it's mythology.
Right. Huh. On that note, I just want you all to, again, reminder, we don't have an official podcast studio. This is a storage room with no HVAC, and it is already 85 degrees outside, so it's getting a little sweaty in here.
That's how we know when to wrap up.
That's how we know it's really warm. We should probably, take a breather and get back into the air conditioning. Megan, I'm going to ask you, parting thought. Did you have a takeaway from this week's sermon?
Yes, my favorite part was the Adam and Eve story, how you talked about Eve and how she wasn't just, deceived by a little snickety snick, right? Because I think for me, even, being a woman, growing up, being a girl, that was a big thing that I was like, man, that sucks for our,
Right.
That doesn't reflect well.
our gender.
Yeah, for sure.
How would a grown woman just be right? And you're like, does it talk? That's not a thing.
It's like a Disney princess when she's like, the mice told me to do it.
That doesn't make any sense. And so that brought a lot of more clarification to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Now, I don't feel like Eve was stupid, right? Because that's what it sounds like when, especially you're growing up and people explain that to you. And then she deceives Adam, and that's a whole other thing too. But so I loved that. And you didn't just say that, Satan was a dragon, whatever, but you say you talk about angels and how they're terrifying, and you brought so much clarification to that too, and the Holy of Holies, and just there were so many things, and they all integrate together. And I think that for me was huge, specifically about Eve and the creation story. So
cool. So if you did not have a chance to watch this week's sermon yet, I would encourage you to go back and, as Lucas suggested, maybe speed it down, or don't speed it up. Don't speed it up for sure. You don't want to go 1.5 speed this week. You're going to miss a lot. And then if it's a lot, watch it again. And you admitted this is like I said at the beginning. This is an overview of I will attest. Literally, Lucas researches this stuff all the time. And you talk about it all the time, and you're constantly, you're just refining your thought process on all of this stuff and learning new things. And so there's a lot there that you condense down into a 45 minute message. So
it's hear me out.
It's definitely something. Yeah, there's a lot there.
But if you have our app, please go to those 3 links below. Those are just 3 that are pretty reputable. There's a lot more out there.
Yeah.
But go to those 3 links below. People who are way smarter than I am, actual scientists, will talk to you about this.
Yeah, they're out there. So there's resources available to you. If you have questions, continuing questions, drop them in the comments. If you're on YouTube, and if you're listening on Spotify, just come find Lucas on Sunday. He loves to talk about this stuff. So never a dull moment. Okay, we have more in our Tough Questions Gardner Asked series coming up. I'm not going to have you go through it all, but this week is the 167 Live on stage Sunday morning, so join us for that. That's going to be real fun. Lucas is hosting with some of the other pastors, and you're going to get a lot of different answers to a lot of questions, different perspectives. We got Pastor Jake coming up in a couple weeks, so that's also going to be a really, really fun Sunday. Be here on August 10th. I'm just going to promo that for him right now. You're not going to want to miss that day. And what else? We hope to see you Saturday at the Johnson County Parade, wrapping up the fair this week. Do you go to the county fair?
I do. I love the
What's your favorite thing about the county fair?
Oh my gosh. Well, I used to love the rides when I was 15, and now I get motion sickness, so I can't do that anymore. But the Ferris wheel is really cute. The food is super yummy, and then all the animals are super cute. So, and it's a good time to hang out with friends.
Okay, it's supposed to cool off too.
I like the fact that it's a time warp.
Oh my gosh.
We walk into the fair, and I'm like, I could be at the county fair in 1990.
Yeah,
it's
really the same.
Yeah, it's boots and tank tops
Fairs
and jeans and hats, and it's like you just look at the way people dress. There's always some burnouts there that are buying a marijuana T-shirt from some, vendor, and it's just I'm just like, what is happening? It's just the same thing over and over and over again.
It's going back in time for sure. Favorite food, fair food.
Funnel cakes.
Okay.
Or cotton candy.
You sound like my children.
Corn dogs.
Yeah, you're a corn dog guy. Also, they have elote at the county fair.
Yeah,
There's a stand that Mexican street corn.
Oh.
Yeah, Lucas loves that stuff.
Or those fries, the curly.
It's the ribbon fries, the curly. Oh my gosh, the big container of. That's me. I'm a potato girl. Yeah, give me some cheese on top of it. Cheese and potatoes are my 2 favorite foods. So speaks to my heart. Anyway, all right. So join us again. Join us Sunday. Join us Saturday. I mean, we got lots of stuff coming up. So just come be a part of what we're doing at New Life Gardner. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out on, we have, this podcast is on Spotify. We have all kinds of things on our Instagram page. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardner.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.